Hello, everyone, and welcome to Budget 2021 Decoded. This was supposed to be the budget that the finance minister said has never been presented before, a budget of one of a kind. And we have a very interesting panel today to discuss what is the impact of this budget in the education sector in India. At least the government today recognizes that the foundation of the new India is going to be the education sector. And to that effect, we've recently had an announcement about the new education policy, which is breathtaking and far reaching in the kind of impact that it promises to make on the very fundamentals of the education sector in India. And now we have the budget. So we're going to put both these things together and put some questions to a very, very experienced and esteemed panel today. I'm going to spend a few minutes and tell you about the people who've joined us today. We are happy to welcome Shishir Miglani. Shishir is the co-founder of an incubator, in fact, India's first recognized accelerator by the state government, which is called Kidspreneur. So he is about the theme of innovation, about startups and how education can help implant this idea of creativity and risk taking in the students of India. We're also happy to welcome Professor Dr. Raj Singh. He is the Vice Chancellor of Jain University. He's, of course, a multi-dimensional personality, an administrator, a teacher, a consultant, a trainer, a speaker, an academic entrepreneur. And for over 2 decades, he's been involved with various facets of the higher education enterprise and industry and innovation across the country. Also the winner of several awards, including the Peter Drucker Memorial Award for Excellence, and so on. We're also happy to have with us Achin Bhattacharya, who is doing something very interesting. He is the founder and CEO of a edtech company called Notebook, and they want to go inside India, into the hinterland, and do content and educational stories in regional languages, clearly to capture the heart of Bharat, which is arguably much bigger than India. And lastly, we have Jayanto Mukherjee with us. He's with the Devi Prasad Goenka Management College of Media Studies, and he's the Chief Officer of Marketing, Communication, and External Affairs. A very interesting designation, and we look forward to discussing with Jayanto about what the education budget means for us. So let me start off by throwing this question to first to Shishir on our panel. Shishir, you heard the finance minister speak, and there was a big segment that was devoted to the education budget. So tell us, what do you think is going to change with the budget 2021 in the context of the new education policy?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me in this panel. And yes, it's interesting time and first budget after those interesting times. We all have faced pandemic, and this being the first budget after the pandemic, there are a lot of expectations, and there were a lot of surprises which a lot of people were waiting, especially in the education sector, because this government has already shown their commitment to improve the education and reform, keeping the National Education Policy 2022 to be an effective year of the new policy. So yes, this budget has a lot of mixes, I would say, and some surprises. But those elements, we need to figure out how this is going to help and evolve education sector. My understanding is maybe because government has dual thought process. Next year, new education policy is going to get impacted and will require a lot of hand-holding throughout. They are consciously treating in this education budget. It's not much to complain about considering the bad economic state we have been in recent past. I think it's a fairly balanced, not much surprises, no frills either. But yes, certain focus areas are very strong. Government has shown their confidence on transforming at least certain school level under the NEP policy, and that allocation is there. Overall allocation is 6% less, and with some capex investment government is planning, I presume that probably would be a little bit more. But having said that, I think the new policy they are trying to unfold, and maybe they'll try to merge it in the next year national education policy reform transformation. I think this budget is considerably balanced in terms of implications. Yes, we need to understand there could have been a little bit more impetus around the national education policy, or certain wider range of a school network could have been allocated under the new transformation stuff, and some capital expenditure could have been evaluated there, at least in a school level, where I think the transformation was much overdue. And thanks to this National Education Policy 2022, which probably would be a key, kind of a key takeaway for transformation here. I think government could have done a little bit more on this budget, but at this time, I think they took the first step, which is a good and brave thing to do at this moment, I would believe. And I think, let's see, by the end of 2021, we should be in a clear state what next budget, and hopefully this time the surprises would be more pleasant. But I think it's like a budget where government took at least two steps forward onto the education. Although with less money in hand, I am a little conscious government has to really control those expenses and control those extra privilege of the budget to avoid leaving a bigger gap.
Sure, Shishir.
Which
So,
might be a problem.
we can hear that you're, using a lot of diplomatic language to essentially say that you would have expected a much more impactful education budget, and you're hoping that that happens in the future. Absolutely, I don't disagree with you. But let me come to Professor Raj Singh. Professor Singh, there have been a lot of big announcements about higher education, especially in the new education policy. And we were all hoping that we are going to see some directionality from the government in this budget in terms of allocation for new universities, etc. But did we miss something? Is there something that you see which would be a glimmer of light in terms of showing the intention of the government to reform higher education in India?
Thanks, Shantanu, and good afternoon, everybody. My comments, of course, will try to answer the question you asked, but they will be mainly based on one is the general tone of this budget, which I would say post-COVID, the focus has been on growth through excessive spending and the V-shaped growth which economy has seen to perhaps further push it. The budget is also to be seen in the light of the emerging scenario of higher education, where for next 4 to 5 years, it's going to be pulled by the provisions of national education policy. It's going to be pushed by the consequences of COVID-19. And I think in between, the role of technology, which all have been talking about, will remain predominant. Another message which the budget has given, particularly in the field of education, whether school or higher education, they have tried to create a competitive scenario wherein no more spoon feeding, but quality has to come in. I'll delve on these points slightly more in detail. So if you look at the total about 6,000 crores of reduction, but compared to the revised budget of last year, it's an increase. The school education has been reduced by 5,000 crores and higher education only about 1,000 crores. As far as the implementation of national education policy is concerned, it has definitely given some direction. As you are aware that the first decade, that is 2020 to 2030, is going to be the decade where we will put in place all the policies, regulations, and guidelines so that all the provisions and the directions given in the national education policy are articulated on ground, implemented on ground. But few things have been made very clear, and first of them is, of course, the institutionalization or setting up of the Higher Education Commission of India, the single regulatory body, which is also with the intention that under HECIE, there will be 4 autonomous roles, which have been, I think, looked after by single or organization which has been looking at maybe regulation and accreditation and all those kind of things together. They will be made autonomous in the sense that all the existing regulatory bodies are planned to become standard setting bodies. So standard setting will be one role, accreditation will be another, funding will be the third role, and regulation will be the fourth kind of part of overall education governance in the country. and HCCI will be the body. And this is in line with the directions of NEP 2020, which said this will ensure light but tight control. There'll be fewer regulations, but the implementation is going to be very, very tight. The most disruptive kind of direction which NEP 2020 has suggested, and there's a clear-cut indication in the budget, wherein establishment of Academic Bank of Credit has been almost institutionalized. Some little budget has also been announced, about 50 crores. Why I say this is the most disruptive provisions? Once this is operationalized, the students will have an option of earning credits from different institutions, provided they're the members, based on accreditation. This is what the draft regulations say, which were announced about a week ago, which means that it's not only the quality of education which the universities will have to provide for, it's the complete student experience which they have to ensure is good. Students are permitted to earn anywhere between 50 to 70% of the credits from other institutions and universities than what they're registered with.
So, Dr.
Now-
Singh, I just want to interrupt you for a second.
Yes.
And this disruptive change that you're talking
Yes.
about,
Yeah.
this will sort of allow students to also shop around where they
Yes.
see the best courses available and the best faculty. And
Yeah.
there would be certain challenges for campus-based universities, which they
Yes.
expect that we will give everything in one campus. And now you're breaking those barriers and allowing students to use technology to reach out wherever they feel they can get the best
Yes.
courses. So we come back to you on some of these disruptive changes, but I want to go across to Achin. Achin, you are addressing a very, very different segment, probably something that nobody else has done before, going into the heartland of India and trying to educate, bring digital content in regional languages. So tell us, what are the highs and lows of this budget for you, especially?
Good afternoon, everyone. I thank the organizers of Founders India for having me here. And Shantanu, thank you so much for this wonderful introduction. I think you very aptly put it that yes, indeed, as a brand, we are trying to reach out to Bharat. With limited success in last 2 years of our existence, yeah, indeed, today, out of 21 lakh students that we teach, 60% are from non-metros. And regional languages, yes, we are working on bilingual content as well. Coming to the budget, Shantanu, the way I look at it, this year's budget really stands out in terms of promoting inclusivity. Inclusivity is one single term. I felt that really the budget has worked on. Now, if you look at the sequence of events over the last few months, even during pandemic, when the whole world was grappling with so many challenges, the fact that India still went ahead with NEP 2020 itself was a very bold message. The fact that, yes, we indeed wanted to push ahead with the reforms. Now, few very key points with regard to inclusivity that has been specifically stated in this year's budget. The intent is completely correct. Yes, implementation, as always, is a challenge where all stakeholders need to come together. Aspects like, first and foremost, Indian Sign Language, the efforts to standardize Indian Sign Language and bring it on board. Efforts in terms of recognizing the fact that assessments should not only judge cognitive skills, but also strengths and weaknesses. So the entire concept of a holistic progress card. Emphasis on utilizing the skills of senior and retired educators to mentor existing teachers. Working on pedagogy, looking at toy-based learning. And very important things like increased budgetary allocation for Eklavya model schools, especially for those in hilly areas and other remote aspirational areas. Increased allocation for SC students, which will benefit more than 4 crore students. Again, another very important thing, online module covering the entire gamut of adult education. Really specifically, also very, very important. So to me, Shantanu, the way I look at it, this year's budget really stands out in terms of inclusivity. Inclusivity is one single word, I'll say. That is, my take from this budget.
Very interesting. So you're saying that, the benefits of development should be spread equally and democratically across the length and breadth of the country and not just limited to urban areas. And that's obviously a, very laudable move. And that's in keeping with the way the government is generally thinking as well. So Joyanto, let me come to you. You're a media man. right? And what is, oftentimes education has been criticized that the biggest spender in media in the country is education. So of course, I want to understand about budget from you. But why do educational institutions spend maybe 10,000 crores a year just on advertising? Are the students not there? And do you think that the budget and the NEP is going to help change some of that factor?
I think you put me in the spot with that question, but I'll take the answer. I'll give you the answer for that. See, when it comes to spending for education, end of the day, unfortunately, in education, everyone is also representing a BNL, which has to go in and out. And if I have to represent my university or my college in front of a student who has a choice of 100 colleges and universities, I have to make them understand and why is my space better. And hence I have to showcase it through ads, through YouTube, through Facebook, through all of this. And my spending is high. When it comes to the budget overall, I think so all the three speakers have been a little responsive on the positive side. But if I take the media out of my way of working and I put the academician back in the camera, I feel this was a missed opportunity for the budget overall. Education this year has suffered in a big way. Students have suffered, universities have suffered, colleges have suffered, teachers have suffered, everyone, because there has been a sudden distance between teaching in real time versus teaching online. And forget the cities. I think so the biggest impact has been on the rural space, has been what happened to teachers who were teaching in the villages who had no digital infrastructure, students who were getting their teaching in the villages who had no digital infrastructure. What about them? I know a lot of examples where they have just not taken drop years. They've dropped off for education overall. I was hoping that the budget would address that part of it in a bigger way, that yes, rural education is a massive part of this overall education we have. And the digital infrastructure in that place should have been strengthened separately. See, NEP is a long game. National education policy is going to implement itself through 10 to 20 years. But what was needed, if our budget overall could be focusing on this year's healthcare, could be focusing on this year's losses, why wasn't education losses of this year addressed? And there has been...
Chendu, that's a very interesting point. So hold the thought there. And I in the other segment now, I want to focus on some big announcements of the budget and really try to get a multi-dimensional perspective from our panelists. So one of the things that stands out for me is this entire issue about vocational education and training. And I note the fact that 3,000 crores this year has been allocated to realign the national apprenticeship training scheme. And I think that's a pretty big move and a big vote of, I would say, intent from the government in how they want to bring the whole concept of employability and embed that within the core of the education system. And I'd like to go to Dr. Raj Singh. Dr. Singh, you have been responsible for educating all these graduates across the illustrious career that you had. And then these students go out and take jobs in some of the best companies in India and across the world. And one of the biggest complaints that comes from the industry is that the colleges are not training them for employment. And they have to spend literally, thousands of crores of rupees of setting up their own training academy after the student got a degree in technology or a degree in whatever domain or discipline he has. So how do you think we can fix this? What do you think is the practical solution that we need as a country to fix this vital issue? Otherwise, this demographic dividend that we talk about is going to become a demographic disaster for us.
Absolutely. And I must emphasize that we don't have more than 10 years. If we don't address this issue, by 2030, we'll hit the brick wall. The concept of skill development in a country is not new. It has been emphasized, and then later on, NSDC and Sector Skill Council. There are various modes through which skill development has been emphasized, and this renewed I think a boost of 3,000 crores on the apprenticeship is welcome. But let me tread cautiously in this, because for last many years, this whole movement of skill development has not been what it should have been or what was intended to be. I'm holding myself almost short of calling it a failed mission. And the reason for this is the way we implemented was faulty, according to me. And I think the new national education policy has tried to address this by single word saying that no hard separations. No hard separations mean more than one thing. One, there shouldn't be any distinction between mainstream degrees through the university, specialized sector-based degrees, or the medical or homeopathy, or even the vocational or skill development. What this policy says that all should be part of the same institution, and what they're promoting is interaction. Skills cannot be developed offline when you're not integrating it with the mainstream education system. One of the examples, of course, is not the skill based, but if you look at teacher education, for example, most of the teacher education institutions in our country are single discipline, less than 100 students. So financial viability is not ensured, and they're not able to interact with the other disciplines which they're meant to, in fact. So another provision which flows from this is that single discipline institutions should go. And all these three-tier institutions, which it talks about, tier 1, tier 2, and the autonomous colleges which can award degrees, they will be multidisciplinary. One of the IIMs where I'm existing, I think this year they're starting 4-year degree in humanities just to move out of single discipline approach, because there's a time limit given to this. And people are really worried, no matter whether you're elite institutions or otherwise. I think for me, the answer to this riddle of skill development and enhancing the employability of our graduates is lying in the pedagogy or andragogy you follow. My friends talked about technology, the reach of it, internet bandwidth. I would say technology is the lungs, but I think pedagogy is the oxygen. Without pedagogy, no technology will work. Because in last 1 year, we have built, I think, a multi-billion-dollar industry without questioning the quality even 1%. Whatever we came across, we adopted it. It's only after about 1 year when we got into the new academic session, we've been starting looking at that what we lost in terms of quality. And therefore, it's the pedagogy I would suggest. You mentioned about project-based learning. Another speaker talked about project-based learning. I would go a step further. And what we've been trying to do for the last 6 months or so, we have made it project-centric learning. Now, project-centric is slightly different from project-based. Project-based still keeps you in the confines of the subject or the course which you're teaching. But project-centric means the project in each semester or term or year becomes centric to whatever is being taught and what students have in terms of previous knowledge. And this will have 3 outcomes. Number 1, it will lead to innovative ideas which can be patented. Some of these ideas could be commercialized, leading to startups. If nothing else, a very good quality research output will be there. I think these 3 outcomes are also the tangible outcomes for any university or higher education institution. But the indirect objectives of this approach would be almost complete implementation of national education policy. It will be able to take us towards attainment of higher order learning outcomes, which is one of the deficiencies of our education system and not making our graduates employable. 3.
So Dr. Singh, this is a very exciting roadmap that we, start moving from the rote learning to project-based, and now you are talking about project-centric.
Yes.
And
yes.
you think that is the solution to providing the entrepreneurial ability or the knowledge of the real world, that these students who graduate are more suited for a real job after they get out of college?
Let me complete in 10 seconds. 10 seconds
Yes.
I'll take. Let me complete it. It will be in line with the national missions like Atmanirbhar Bharat. And 4, it will make universities and institutions relevant locally. While they keep their eyes on the global benchmarks, they will solve local problems using those world-class benchmarks. Now, if you look at this, not everybody will become entrepreneur. Maybe 5-10% will become entrepreneurs, but believe me, everybody would become enterprising and in the process become more employable.
Wonderful, wonderful. So everybody doesn't need to be entrepreneur, but everybody can be enterprising.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think one of the things in our country that we have always used the right words whenever we have tried to address a problem. If you look at the education thinking in India, right from the Kothari Commission report onwards, we have always said the right things, but we have never done the right things. So
Absolutely.
this project-centric learning, are you doing it in the universities that you head? And if so,
Yes.
what is the impact that it is having in real life on the students that are under your care, for example?
Well, I'm implementing in this university full-fledged across disciplines, irrespective of whether you belong to humanities, engineering, or management, and removing the notion that entrepreneurship is not the proprietary of engineers and management graduates. Sometimes humanities graduates can become better entrepreneurs, and rest of the skills can be hired. My own evolution has been over last about 8 to 9 years, when we started with the very simple 1-month-long projects, but the emphasis was on interdisciplinarity. And then the way it got refined, here we have opened a nucleus in the university, project-centric learning with collaboration with foreign experts, where emphasis is the punchline we adopted, taking education to the intersection of research and practice. Because all our research, whether it's PhD level or research organizations or master's level, you will agree with me, stops at academic research, which keeps on lying in our thesis and books and project reports and doesn't lead to anything else. I remember Dr. R.A. Mashelkar once had said, he said, research converts data and information into knowledge and consumes money. It's the innovation which converts that knowledge back into money. If you can complete this cycle, believe me, we will overcome all the issues related to resource availability for research. And therefore, the emphasis through this project-centric learning is to take research further to innovation and entrepreneurship. It's only then we will become relevant to the society, relevant to the country, and make the impact which we are supposed to make.
Let's go to Mr. Miglani, who's actually in the business of doing this, of helping people create wealth or do a lot of innovation. So Shishir, on this whole topic of vocational, because this is really the heart of what you do, what are your thoughts about what more could we possibly do to fuel the entrepreneurial revolution in the country, and what implications does it have for the education system?
Thanks, Shantanu. I really wanted to chip in here because that's what exactly Kidspreneur is trying to transform, is by giving a platform to school students along with startups to, so far our education system has been limited to an academic learning format. What happens is whenever you get into a job thing, you'll have to do some internship. Unless you are from the top rung of the colleges, you get into internship process, then you rise through the corporate ladder, and that takes a lot of time. And that also reflects the gap between the real world skills and the actual academic intervention these students are experiencing. And that's what Kidspreneur is trying to do, to break this jinx at the school level itself. That what national education policy is focused on, and I really hope that this transformation comes into an immaculate execution, because I think government, whereas the biggest facilitators, often do act as bottleneck as well when it comes to implementation.
Just give us one example of how your program has actually helped, or what kind of projects are coming out from schools because your program is running on those schools. Anything that you can remember right now, which you think has actually shown the tangible benefits of this new methodology?
Sure. So right now we are working with students in 7 countries, 2 state governments here, where we are training these kids for entrepreneurial mindset learning to become enterprising and problem solvers, not necessarily entrepreneurs, as Mr. Singh has aptly said this here. And with our little focus over last 2.5 years, we have been able to bring out some of the curious and very interesting ideas. And right now we are proud to say that we have 7 student startups who run their own businesses, and they are even making little money out of it. So basically, the education is no longer limited to the learning part of it. We invest our time, we invest them with the seed fund which they require without any liability of a failure, and then ask them to use this learning and create something interesting, maybe a problem to solve, an innovative idea or something. And right now we are proud to say we have 7 student startups, and a couple of them would probably hand over their visiting cards to you when you meet them. And they are in the midst of making money as well alongside. So I think that's where the policy implementation success comes into play, in the real life experiences, where we just do not say it for the sake of saying it, but we also show real examples to the kids that, okay, this is what real life skills and real skilling can bring forward in the
Shishir, you might have noted that in this budget, there is also this proposal of having one-person companies, precisely to help innovators and young entrepreneurs like the students that you have. So we pray that may your tribe increase from 7 students to maybe 700,000 students soon, because India needs as many entrepreneurs and founders as it can get. Achin, there was a question that was lingering in my mind when you were speaking. You talked about this divide, where it is the students in urban centers, so-called India, which sort of get all the latest education, the best coaching classes, the best teachers, the best school infrastructure. Whereas you are going out to the sort of more underprivileged areas. But when it comes to skilling as well, we use words like entrepreneurship for students coming out of urban colleges, like the IIMs or IITs. And we talk about skilling, which is more sort of, blue collar for students coming out from rural areas. Do you recognize that this is also a real divide that needs to be bridged?
Yeah. See, the way I look at it, Shantanu, I see it's not only about urban and rural area. More than that, I guess the way we can look at it is, if you look at the pyramid, different layers of the economic strata. Even people who are marginalized and staying in urban areas as well, right? The challenge is all the same. I think here I was listening very patiently to Dr. Singh, and he made some very good points, as well as Shishir. Few things that I would like to add, and in context to your question as well. First and foremost, I think one thing which is really important is, today, if you look at the entire skill development structure of the country, there are various bodies which are working on this. NSDC is there. There are various institutions, etc., involved in this. I think one key area which we really need to focus on as a nation, if we indeed want to utilize our demographic dividend, and as Dr. Singh rightly pointed out, the window is fairly limited, before which we plateau, just like many other countries in the world have plateaued. And I guess that is with regard to development of soft skills, which is equally important. It's not only about domain knowledge, but also about soft skills, whether you are able to present yourself and get appropriate market for your skills. Or else, because we have been discussing about unemployment, but another challenge which I would like to discuss in the same breath is underemployment. That also happens. You end up underselling yourself, right? Underselling your skills. And somehow you are exploited. You're not getting a fair market price for your skills or services that you're rendering. So I guess this is one area which really needs to be taken very seriously. And yes, you are completely right, Shantanu. I completely agree with you that students who are in aspirational districts, rural areas, etc., the severity of challenge definitely is more in terms of the fact that they are limited in terms of access. Having said that, right now, technology, undoubtedly, internet has been a great savior in this regard. Flow of information, by and large, is seamless. People are aware about the opportunities. People are aware about the challenges. Going by our experience that we have seen of working in these areas, and how quickly people have adapted to technology, and how aware they are with regard to opportunities that are available to them. I think the need of the hour is to systematically work on the soft skills so as to upgrade them. And second is, I guess, industry also has a huge role to play. All stakeholders need to come together. Things need to really move beyond drawing room conversations. We can look at the government, definitely huge responsibility, but steps are being taken in the right direction. I guess industry also, in terms of providing opportunities for internship, apprenticeship, because industry interaction really makes a world of difference. Coming to academia again, they also have a huge role to play, because I think we have been discussing about pedagogy. Pedagogy per se really lays the foundation. One way monologues, chalk and talk pedagogy, instructor-led delivery, really leads to loss of confidence. The need of the hour is definitely far more participative learning, where the student is no longer a passive recipient, but an active participant. Peer-to-peer learning, activities, being involved. These things really will give the desired level of confidence, because tomorrow when you go out and face an interview, tomorrow you go out and face a group interview, a group discussion, is the student able to come up? Maybe he or she knows. Maybe the student is completely aware. If you give him or her 10 minutes to cool down and a one-on-one interaction, he or she may be able to speak in her own way, in her own language. But are we being able to instill the right amount of confidence? And I guess as a society, it is really our responsibility, all stakeholders, to come forward and do that. If we do that, definitely we'll get far more leaders from rural areas. When I say leaders in all areas, leaders in industry, leaders in entrepreneurship, leaders in social movements, leaders in politics, and that's the need of the hour. So much of talent lies there.
Achin, I'm going to pick up this one point that you mentioned about the importance of soft skills. And in this particular budget, there has been a special mention that life skills, and that's the word that the minister is using, needs to be incorporated as a subject in schools as well as universities. So, forever we have been known as a nation of hard skills. We are supposed to be great at software, at analytics, at engineering jobs. But when it comes to soft skills, all of us know and all of us agree that a lot more work has to be done. And I think where a lot of people are lost right now is not that they don't recognize the advantage of soft skills, but they're confused about how to go about it. So I'd like to ask Professor Singh as to what are your thoughts on what could be a scalable model to make sure that every child has well-rounded holistic development, and we are able to emphasize this aspect of communication, interpersonal relationships, design thinking, creativity, critical thinking, and so on, which are completely missing from a lot of our analytical curriculum today.
Thank you, Shantanu, for asking this question. In fact, something very close to my heart, and I've been dealing with this for last almost 25, 26 years. When I met industry experts, sometimes during 1990s and later in the decade of 2000, believe me, I'll seriously make a note of it. And if I combine all of them, I have a list of about 25 things which lack in our graduates, according to industry experts, even though they held them back from giving me the solutions. And therefore, I think we, among our contemporaries, we joined heads together. And one, we found out some of the reasons. What are the reasons for this? And second, perhaps, what are the solutions for this? One single most important factor which I blame this for is the coaching mentality we have developed in this country. After 6th class, we hand over kids to the coaching centers. And believe me, they prepare them for only 1 or 2 examinations, and rest, everything is forgotten. We deny our children to live life. We deny our children to explore their interests and aptitudes. And rest is the history. You all know more than me. But in the process, what has happened, skills or coaching focus on something which is relevant in a time and space. But education is for life. We have denied our children education. This is point number one. Number two, national education policy has made amply clear this will discourage coaching. But one thing very important which made out of this adding first 3 years of foundation years is that life skills have been relegated to the domain of school education. And college and university education is expected to deliver more on the solutions for the problems of society, for the community, and the industry. I'm sure all of you are aware, companies like Google and Tesla have already announced that we don't need degrees, 10+2 qualification is enough. Through their own apps, they've been able to develop an application where they can predict your career trajectory for next 10 years and what stage, what kind of skills will be required for you to be on a particular trajectory. And they will also provide those skills. In fact, my concern is slightly different. The universities, as we have known them, are beginning to disappear as we have known them. And this is the biggest fear. And the model which I have suggested is based on our experiment of last 7 to 8 years. Just to inform you, we've been able to produce about 56 startups in last 4 years, involving about 400 graduates. And our targets of next 5 years are 8,000 plus. And we were looking at a model which can lead to mass number of students moving in this direction. And then we said, well, in the certain sectors, we can't have those many startups and enterprises. And that's where we focus on social entrepreneurship. And the underpinning, academic underpinning for this is came, being a professor, I must give you the academic underpinning also, from the fortune at the bottom of pyramid of C.K. Prahlad, the microfinancing of Muhammad Yunus, and the capability approach of our own Amartya Sen. If you combine these three concepts, it exposes you to a huge potential to 4.5 billion people plus in the world. And you can proportionately calculate how much in India we have. They are the people to be targeted. And therefore, we need to move towards deeper pockets in the countryside of our country where, I can give one example. One of our entrepreneurs, she focused on Ayush movement in the country as against the medical system we have had. And then she sourced the inputs, raw material from deep down in the hills and rural areas of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. And she has set up manufacturing facilities in 2 states involving about 400 people there. And the kind of pricing which she has, she can disrupt the entire industry, believe me. She's able to sell those products at 10 times the cost. Now, those kind of margins exist if we can innovate on the supply side and the manufacturing side. also optimize on the labor side of it, that how much it really requires. And each person who's employed in these factories is able to sustain a family of 4 to 5 people. I think we need to target in millions when we talk about entrepreneurship. And as you rightly said, it's not only the organizations like which serve hundreds of people. It could be one man, one person kind of enterprise we should look at. And thankfully, technology has facilitated this. We cannot compete with larger organizations, but I think many small organizations can come together and perhaps become supportive to them, become collaborative to them. And then whether upward or downward of supply chain, I think it's that area we should focus on. Answering your question of soft skills, I'm not in favor of an offline module for soft skills, or for that matter, any skill. Unless it is integrated into the delivery of mainstream program, it won't happen. I cannot design a program of 30, 40, 50 hours and say, I'll develop soft skills in you, or I'll develop communication skills in you, or I'll develop team skills in you. It has to be embedded in the program. My question to everybody here is that why communication skills can't be taught by the professor who's teaching them accounting or mathematics or physics or chemistry? Why do we need to have a separate class or separate course for teaching them communication skills? Because they need some material. And let them use the subject material there. And believe me, it has been absolutely successful, absolutely amazing. So focus should shift from developing these skills in the students to developing these skills in the teachers. And teachers absolutely ignored, absolutely ignored.
That's a whole new chapter on faculty development, which is a
Yes.
massive area in India. One of the biggest critical shortages in education across school
Yes.
and higher education is not capital or it's not infrastructure, it's actually people. So
Yes.
we'll come to that. But Shishir, you're running an incubator and accelerator, and sometimes I meet entrepreneurs and they're not very good at expressing things. They said, no, my product will speak for itself, or my business will speak for itself. Do you believe that entrepreneurs also need skills, or soft skills, or do you think running a successful business is good enough?
Well, if you're running a successful business, you don't need to, give explanations to anyone. Whatever you do probably would end up being right. But yes, and to make it to that level, you definitely need skills. And to keep it on that level, you definitely need even more skills, and you need to hone up those skills even to the sharper levels.
So in the
And maybe
curriculum
those
in the curriculum that you are teaching, or you're creating this experiential learning modules, is soft skills or life skills, which is a larger concept of soft skills, is that a part of what Critspreneur Academy is doing?
Exactly. So none of our we do a lot of GYAN dissemination and stuff, but none of our curriculum or none of our sessions are driven by that fact. It's totally immersive. It's totally hands-on, and it just focuses on the life skill which you need, or which a student may need to face any problem. We provide them those structured thinking processes which he can utilize to solve any problem which he faces, not just to run an enterprise itself, or not just to solve a problem alone. Now, having said that, our whole aim is to support education to make it more relevant for the future. What I believe personally is, in today we are preparing kids for a year to year down the line at max, whereas we should prepare those kids for 4-5 years down the line, because by then the skills which we are preparing them for will probably become redundant, and they need to skill up anyway. So coming back to your questions, I would say not just entrepreneur, but this goes for everyone, including faculties who are teaching, stakeholders who are deploying policy. They need to be trained and made aware about the new developments, new transformations that are happening world across. Only then an inclusive society is possible. I think without that skilling or upskilling, just entrepreneurs are not the only stakeholder here. We all are, for that matter, as far as my thought process is concerned.
Thank you, Shishir. Achin, very interesting fact that I was noticing in your own profile was that you yourself come from a small town that is on the Bengal-Jharkhand border. And now you're running a very successful edtech startup. So one of the things that I have observed is that very bright students who have scored extremely well, maybe 95, 98% in the exams, when they come to big cities, they are not able to express themselves. They feel a little bit intimidated. So the question that I wanted to ask you was that we often look at communication ability and we use that as a definition of soft skills. But tell me from your own life experience as to what does the gamut of soft skills include? Is it only the way you communicate and the way you dress, or is it something which is fundamentally far deeper than all of this?
First of all, Shantanu, very good question. I must compliment you for this. Very good question. And I think I completely agree with you that when we try to define soft skills, I also firmly believe that it's a far bigger concept, far wider concept, the way I look at it. It's not only about how you speak, because at times when you communicate, it's not only about what you say, you communicate even through your body language, the way you carry yourself, the way you conduct, the way you lead by example. So I guess, and in today's age, be it any profession, I guess if you ask me, one fundamental quality which is indispensable if you want to succeed in what you do, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're a professional, you're a good doctor, there might be two equally good doctors with their clinic side by side, offering their services. One of the key reasons which will define 10 years down the line, say two friends fresh out from medical college, starting their practice in the same city, the same vicinity, and catering to same category of patients. 10 years down the line, if you look at them, chances are more that your ability to communicate, because when you communicate, it is really important that you're able to communicate to your patient as well with regard to your line of treatment. The patient deserves to know, the patient has every right to know, right? Today, if it's an educated, well-informed patient, the moment you walk into your doctor's chamber, chances are more that you've already Googled it and you walk in with partial knowledge. So naturally, it's the doctor's responsibility to take you on board. And same goes for any profession, whether you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're an entrepreneur. Like I was listening to what Shishir was answering with regard to entrepreneurship. My take on that is, it is really important. I think as far as other skills are concerned, you can hire somebody, you can hire a great technocrat. Like say today, I come from an accounting, I'm a chartered accountant. I'm not I didn't come from an IT background. So I have an IT who are helping me out. I understand the basics. I have an analytical frame of mind. But much more important, when it comes to putting your views across, that's something that only you can do. Nobody else can do. And it's not only about convincing your customer. All stakeholders, whether internal stakeholders or external stakeholders, are equally important. Say, for example, today you are speaking to a probable employee, somebody who walks into your office to give an interview. In today's age, an interview is a two-way selection process. Not only the employer has a right or the privilege, unlike olden days, to accept or reject an employee, the employee equally is judging the employer to understand what are my career prospects. Might be you have started a new setup and somebody who is working with a much more established competitor of yours walks into your office, right? Then it completely depends on your own individual ability to align that person to your vision. I think vision alignment is something which is indispensable, whether it is your employee, whether it is your vendor, whether it is your customer, whether it is your consultant. And how does this vision alignment happen? First and foremost, which is really important, is are you being able to put across your views? Can you really strike a chord? And today, any successful profession, say, I always give the example of politics because that's one thing that all of us, see. One of the key factors, most important factors is for a political leader to be successful is he or she being able to put his views in such a manner that he can connect with the man on the street, even with regard to most complicated topics. So whether speaking about GST or demonetization, is he being able to convince the man on the street who for the first time is hearing what GST is? He doesn't understand what GST is. No idea. But two sentences and at least the basics are put across. We may always argue that the details lie in the devil, in the fine print. There are a lot of other aspects. But at least is the crux conveyed so as to ensure that in a democracy, because in a democracy, that person also has an equal voice, same vote as you and me. Is that person on board? I think that's true for all professions. So I think you very rightly defined, the point that you put across. It's not only about how you speak, it's not only about your communication skill, but also each and every factor that goes into making a successful individual and in any walk of life, whether it's successful academician. Say Dr. Singh was discussing about the fact, and I think sir made a very valid point, Dr. Singh, that why can't soft skills be taught by professors? Yes, of course, why not? If a professor, because at the end of the day, the way I look at it, it really doesn't matter who is teaching. What really matters is the child understanding. We were discussing about tuitions. I understand nowhere else in the world such parallel system of schooling exists. But why is it existing? Because the need is perpetual. Why is the need perpetual? Because there's a gap somewhere. So first of all, we need to understand the gap, come to terms with it, and then find a solution. So I think it's about
Ajin,
teaching a child, whether in school or out of school.
Ajin, one of the things that I can definitely say that you have put across your point very eloquently. So definitely, the members of this panel definitely do not lack life skills. And probably that is the reason that they are so extremely successful. Professor Jaiswal, welcome to the show. My first question to you is in the context of the new education policy. Certainly, there were lots of very big announcements towards changing a lot of the fundamental structure of how we look at education in India. So, can you tell us, what are the implications for management education in particular? And also, as a director of IIM Sambalpur, how is your institution preparing itself to meet the new mandate of the education policy?
Yeah. So very good morning and very right questions. That the new education policy called NEP 2020 highlights of these policies are that the objective is basically to upgrade the quality of education. That is the first, and to also shift the entire teacher-centric teaching to learning-centric. And some of the features are that they want to make most of the institutions interdisciplinary learning. And they also have talked about flexibility, like you can, have your education while you can also work. So you can go for a year and come back. 3 to 4 years, you can complete your education. And it also talks about inclusive. So what I feel is that after so many decades that this policy has come, and it has rightly come because we have been having our education system primarily created by Britishers. And Britishers systems were basically to create clerks. Everything is well known in the books, written, everything. And we used to just replicate that, the rote learning, that is called rote learning. Now, the first time the government of India has come out very clearly that we should come out from the rote learning to innovation-based learning. So that way, I welcome this education policy. However, its implementations are quite challenging because for years, for more than 70 years, we have been trained. The teachers have been trained, and students have also been trained that we should provide the education which is very well defined, fixed. There's no questions of any kind of questioning coming in the class. So we used to learn what is already there in the existing literature, and we never thought of creating something new. And thus, as a result, none of our higher education, including IIT and IIM, is in the top 200 in the world. I hope if this NEP is implemented by some of the institutions, I'm sure few of our institutions will be ranked globally in the top 100, maybe in the top 50 in another 5 to 10 years. Now, coming back to your second part of the question, that what are you doing at IIM Sambalpur? Now, IIM Sambalpur, being a management education institute of Government of India, and the premium brand of IIM's categories. What we thought is that in order to implement NEP, we have started shifting from in the classroom, we have method called flipped classroom, in which we are actually not teaching the existing literature, but what we are saying that bring the industry live project and create new ideas, create new research, questions, and try to solve unsolved problems of industry, because we are in the management field, and create cases out of that. I think that is the set which we have taken, and for the last couple of months, it has been very, very successful that we brought live project in the classroom, and students and faculty members together are trying to solve that industry problems, so that it creates new knowledge in that particular discipline. For example, in marketing, we brought one startup from the field, which is in the robotic field. And we have given this project to students that how this can be scaled up, how the new market can be created, use the latest tools and techniques or digital marketing tools, and create a big market, global market, for this particular company. Same way, we are bringing in human resource, the problems which are, for example, in the COVID pandemic period, a lot of people have started working from home. What is the implications of that? So are we shifting towards gig economy? Are every individual becoming entrepreneurs? So business school has to actually look into those opportunities. So we have started looking to that. I'm sure this will become the model for management education in coming years. And in terms of inclusiveness, we were the first IIMs to increase our gender diversity. Generally, it used to be 14 to 15%. We are the first in 2019. We come out with in 2020 admissions, 49% and 43% gender diversity. So that is the kind of changes which we have brought into our education systems at IIM Sambalpur.
Okay, that's really fascinating, Professor Jaiswal, that you're, already taken up the mandate of the new education policy in terms of the change in pedagogy and are implementing that through flipped classrooms.
Right.
So, all colleges have been closed for a while or had been closed because of the pandemic. And there has
Right.
been a very big rise of online learning during this time when campuses
Right.
were physically closed. Now,
Right.
as the director of a campus-based institute, how do you feel that this kind of learning will go forward? Are we looking at a scenario of a hybrid learning of campus and online combined, or do you think the campus-based institutions themselves have to transform a little bit to take advantage of the new technological developments?
Yes, absolutely. So I would go for the second option, what you have suggested, that it's a blended learning, and we have already started the blending mode. And it was, I would say that COVID became an accelerator of the digital education. Digital education was already there. The only thing is that people were not adopting because every other industry has adopted, and education also falls under the service industry. Service industry worldwide is already more than 80 to 90%, including bank, telecommunications, e-commerce. Everything is already 90% are already in the digital mode. Education was a very slow process of transformations. Fortunately, I would say that COVID has given the accelerations for the digital adoptions in the education systems. And we pioneered that we started conducting even online proctoring-based exams. So students are sitting at home during the COVID lockdown, and we had to conduct the end-term exam, which is a descriptive exams. They have to write. Now for that, we use online proctoring system, means in the computer-based, AI-based systems can monitor any kind of manipulation being done by students so that they can't do it. Same time, type of question paper also need to be reframed. You cannot ask straightforward question which is based on the books. So it is an open book exams. Most of the institutions are now adopting this. It's open book exam where you have to write something which is not there in the book. I think that is the shift, and that is the right shift, and that is the benefit of online education. Now we have started opening our campus, but campus, even it is open, many things will be online. And let me tell you, this is given a big opportunity for institutions like us because we are in a smaller town. There used to be a challenge in terms of bringing industry professionals or visiting faculty, visiting campus, in the offline mode. Right now, we are able to access best resource of the world and best project of the industry. They are just sponsoring online. So all the problems which can be given, which can be solved by students in the camp, even in the when the campus opens physically, we still have a lot of things online. So it is a blended mode, which is going to be giving strength to the institutions which are new institutions, and particularly those who is located in a smaller town where there is a connectivity issues in terms of physical connectivity of airlines, or people traveling is a challenge. So I think it has given a boost to our systems, and we got the big advantage that today we are able to get best faculty of the world, best industry project in the class, and students are learning more than that. And I have taken the feedback of students, and they are finding learning has got enriched in this mode. And when they come physically, there'll be some part will be physical in terms of extracurricular activities or discussions and kind of a physical sports, but rest of the things will remain digital, even if it is open after a few months.
Actually, Professor, you're so right that some of the older limitations of location will no
Right.
longer exist in an online world. But
Right.
coming to this very immediate thing that everybody is talking about, the new education budget.
Right.
Do you think that the allocation of resources has been done in accordance with the new policy, or do you feel that there is our allocation has to be in a particular way so that we can achieve our national education goals?
You have to understand that budget is annual, whereas new education policy is for many years. This policy is not only to be implemented within 1 year. So you cannot, you don't need entire fund for implementation of NEP just now. Right now, I think the first priority is, to shift from the entire teaching to learning. And for that, trainings, capacity building, webinar, those are required. And this already has been happening for the last couple of months. We are conducting many webinars on the new education policy. However, the budget has given, priority to building, creating employment, creating demand, growth, so that our economy takes off, and building infrastructure, physical as well as social, health infrastructure. These are the priority. So definitely, you have to understand that the government has to allocate enough fund which is required immediately. However, for new education policy, they have already given directions. They are already asking each institutions to come out with a clear-cut implementation plan, and each institutions are also being asked to provide allocation, because allocation of the funds are generally done by the institutions and the state government. It is not education is a center and state concurrent list. And some of the central institutions, when you talk about, they don't have a scarcity of fund. IIMs have enough fund, IIT have enough fund. And in terms of digital infrastructure, what is needed, I'm sure the government will be doing is a Digital India program, which should strengthen the school and colleges located remotely, where I think they need to create digital board, they need to create learning management system, they need to retrain the teachers. So those will be the long-term priority, and I'm sure, and also providing internet connectivity. So partly it is available, but I would agree that this investment will be done again. I'm sure in coming budgets this will be taken care. But right now it is not immediately required. Whatever is basic thing required is already there. Only thing is orientations. And you must have seen that last couple of months everybody was doing, even in online you don't need very expensive product. Just you have some kind of online video conferencing systems and internet, and even with mobile people are able to provide educations. But in order to implement NEP, you need to create content in the local language. You need to create kind of trained teachers, which is a long-term strategy which can't be done overnight. So I'm sure in the coming budgets that will be also taken care.
See, the education is such a fundamental and such an important part of India, or rather the world, that we can potentially go really deep and discuss a lot of topics, but very, very fascinating discussion. I think a lot of very deep insights have come in today from your experience, from 3-4 very, very diverse parts of the education ecosystem. So I'd like to thank all of you helping us decode the education industry, helping us decode what's happening with the budget and the new education policy. And I think we wish all of us, all citizens of India, a wonderful implementation of the new education policy, because that's the only way that the new India we have dreamed for ourselves can actually come true. Thank you very much again, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shantanu. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.